You ever have someone mess with your property so casually, like it's no big deal, like your boundaries are just suggestions? Yeah, that's exactly how this started, and trust me, it didn't end small. It ended with a luxury resort writing me a six-figure check just to undo the mess they thought they could get away with. And the wild part? It all started with trees, just trees, right? That's what they said. So here's the setup. I own this wooded hillside just outside a small vacation town, quiet place, the kind of land people dream about when they're tired of noise and neighbors and HOA letters about mailbox paint colors. Tall pines, thick maples, a few old cedar trees that looked like they'd been standing there long before any human decided to draw property lines. It wasn't just land, it felt established, like it had roots deeper than paperwork. Now downhill from me, there's this row of luxury rental cabins. Not your average cabins either. We're talking polished wood decks, glass railings, hot tubs, the whole premium Sunset Valley view experience. And yeah, I'll admit it, the view from those decks? Gorgeous. Wide open valley, golden light hitting the hills at sunset, the kind of thing people pay extra for on vacation listings. Apparently, not gorgeous enough. The first time I noticed something was off, it didn't hit me as serious. I was walking my property line, something I do every couple of weeks just to keep an eye on things, and I saw a few branches trimmed off one of my pines. Clean cuts. Not broken, not weather damage, cut. But not aggressively either, just enough to open a little window through the trees. I remember standing there thinking, okay, probably some guest got a little too comfortable. You know how people are on vacation, rules feel optional. So I let it go. A week later, I'm back out there, same walk, same stretch of land, and more branches are gone. Not just one tree this time, two, maybe three. And now it's not random anymore. The cuts are deliberate, spaced out, almost like someone's shaping the view from below. That's when it starts to feel weird. Still, I didn't jump to conclusions. I figured maybe maintenance crews got sloppy, crossed the line without realizing it. Happens sometimes. So I kept watching. Then week 3 hit, and that's when it crossed a line you don't come back from. One of my younger pine trees, gone. Completely gone. Not damaged, not half-cut gone. Just a stump sitting there like a bad joke. And I just stood there staring at it, trying to process how someone walks onto land they don't own, fires up a saw, and decides, yeah, this tree doesn't need to exist. That's when I made the call. I reached out to the resort office, got connected to the property manager, a woman named Lauren. Calm voice, very polished, the kind of tone that says she's used to smoothing things over before they escalate. I explained the situation. Trees on my land were being cut, repeatedly. She apologized immediately, like almost too quickly, and said she'd remind the maintenance team to stay within their designated boundaries. And for a second, I almost believed that was the end of it. It wasn't. Because the next week, I walked that same hillside again, and this time, 2 large cedar limbs had been cut. Not small branches. I'm talking thick, mature limbs that had been growing for years. And at that point, it clicks. This isn't carelessness. This is strategy. Someone down there is slowly, methodically opening up a better view. Trimming a little here, cutting a little there, just enough each time that it doesn't trigger an immediate reaction, unless you're paying attention. And now I was paying attention. So I did what anyone would do when they realize something shady is happening on their land. I set up trail cameras. 3 of them, angled along the property line, hidden just enough that you wouldn't notice unless you knew exactly where to look. 3 nights later, I had my answer. I'm sitting at my kitchen table, scrolling through footage, and there it is, 2 maintenance workers from the resort, walking up the slope with battery-powered saws like they've done this before. No hesitation, no checking boundaries, nothing. They go straight to the trees above Cabin 12's deck, my trees, and start cutting. Calm. Efficient. Like it's part of the job. That's the moment everything shifts. Because now it's not a misunderstanding anymore. It's a decision. So I take the footage, send it directly to Lauren. No accusations, just facts. This is happening on my property. We need to talk. And then nothing. No reply. No acknowledgement. Just silence. Which, if you've ever dealt with situations like this, you already know, silence isn't neutral. Silence is a strategy. So I drove down there. Walked straight into the resort office, footage ready, patience already wearing thin. Lauren's sitting behind the desk, same calm expression, like we're about to have a pleasant little conversation about booking adjustments or something. I laid it out. the footage, the repeated cutting, the property line. And she just smiled. Not nervous, not defensive, just composed. And then she said something that, I swear, flipped a switch in my head. She goes, well, our guests do pay a premium for the Valley View package. And I'm just staring at her like, okay, and then she follows it up with, it's only trees, they grow back. Yeah, that sentence right there, that's the moment this stopped being a neighborly issue and turned into something else entirely. Because it wasn't about trees anymore. It was about entitlement. It was about someone deciding that their business model mattered more than my property rights. That if they could improve their guest experience by taking something from me, slowly enough, quietly enough, I'd either not notice or not fight back. And here's the thing, people like that, they don't stop until something stops them. So standing there in that office, listening to her reduce years of growth, legal boundaries, and basic respect down to it's only trees, I realized something very simple. If they wanted to treat my land like it didn't matter, I was about to show them exactly how much it did. All right, let me pause the story for a second, because this is where a lot of people underestimate what's actually happening. On the surface, it looks like a petty neighbor dispute, trees getting trimmed, views getting opened up, but legally and psychologically, this is a completely different game. According to standard procedure, anytime you're dealing with property lines, especially in hillside or resort zoning areas, there are very clear rules. You don't touch anything beyond your boundary, period. Even trimming branches across a line without permission can count as trespass and property damage. And once you bring in mature trees, especially protected species, now you're talking fines, replacement costs, and sometimes penalties that stack fast. From a legal perspective, what they were doing wasn't just careless, it was calculated risk. They were betting that small, incremental damage wouldn't trigger a full response. That's actually common in disputes like this. People test limits slowly to see how much they can get away with. And psychologically, this is a classic escalation pattern. This is a psychological trap. When someone minimizes the harm, it's only trees. They're trying to reframe the situation so you question whether it's even worth fighting. If you accept that framing, you lose leverage immediately. The moment I heard that line, I knew this wasn't about trees anymore. It was about control. So yeah, the second she said, it's only trees, something in me just locked in. Not anger. Not the loud kind anyway. More like that quiet, focused kind where everything suddenly becomes very clear. Because now I understood the game they were playing, and more importantly, I knew exactly how to change the rules. I didn't argue with her in that office. Didn't raise my voice, didn't threaten anything. I just nodded, said, got it, and walked out. And I could tell. She thought that meant I was backing down. That I'd accepted her framing, that I'd decided this wasn't worth the fight. That assumption cost them everything. The very next morning, I started making calls. First to a licensed surveyor. Not one of those quick estimate guys. I mean a full boundary verification, markers, documentation, the whole package. If this was going to escalate, I wanted zero ambiguity about where my land began and where theirs ended. Then I called an arborist. And not just anyone. Someone who specialized in tree valuation and preservation law. Because here's something most people don't realize. Trees aren't just trees when it comes to property law. Especially older ones. They have measurable value. Age, species, condition, environmental impact. All of that factors into what they're legally worth. And if you damage or remove them without permission, you don't just replace them, you compensate for what they represented. A few days later, both reports came back. The survey was clean, precise, no gray areas. Every single tree that had been trimmed, cut, or removed was clearly on my property. Not borderline, not close enough, fully mine. But the arborist report? That's where things got interesting. Several of the cedars they had trimmed weren't just mature. They were classified under local hillside preservation guidelines, which basically means you don't touch them without permits, documentation, and approval. And even then, removal isn't guaranteed. And that pine tree they cut down like it was nothing? Replacement value, just over $20,000 for one tree. Now imagine stacking that with multiple trees, repeated violations, and documented intent. Yeah, this wasn't small anymore. But then, the surveyor found something else. Something bigger. He walks me along the lower edge of the property line, pointing out markers, explaining measurements, and then he stops near the backside of the cabins. And he goes, you might want to take a look at this. 3 of the luxury cabin decks, the expensive ones, the ones marketed with that premium valley view, had rear support posts extending into my hillside. Not by inches, by about 5 feet. 5 feet. Meaning those structures weren't just benefiting from my land visually, they were physically on it. And the craziest part? It looked like it had been that way for years. So now we're not just talking about trees. Now we're talking about encroachment. I went home, pulled out every document I had related to the property, old sale records, agreements, anything tied to the previous owner. And after digging through a stack of papers that probably hadn't been touched in a decade, I found it. A signed document from about 8 years back. Temporary permission. Granted to the resort during a storm cleanup season, allowing limited trimming of certain trees along the boundary. Strictly temporary, clearly defined, and explicitly not permanent. 1 season. That's it. No extensions, no automatic renewal, nothing. Which meant whatever argument they were preparing about long-term use or assumed rights. Gone. Completely gone. At that point, I called a lawyer. And I'll be honest, I didn't go in asking, what can we do? I went in asking, how far can this go? Because now I had documented trespass, unauthorized tree removal, potential violations of preservation laws, and structural encroachment. That's not a complaint, that's leverage. We drafted a formal notice and sent it to the resort's ownership group, not just the local office, the actual decision makers. It laid everything out, clean and direct. Cease all cutting immediately, compensate for damages, and remove any structures encroaching onto my property within a fixed time frame. 14 days. Their response came through their attorney, and it was exactly what you'd expect. Polite tone, confident language, and a whole lot of stretching. They argued historical use, visual maintenance, and implied that the boundary had been informally accepted over time, which, honestly, might have worked if I didn't have that signed document. So we sent a second letter. This one, less polite. It included the survey, the arborist report, the valuation, and a copy of the original agreement showing their permission had expired years ago. And it outlined exactly what would happen next if the situation continued. Timber damage claims, preservation fines, trespassing penalties, and legal orders to remove the deck structures entirely. No bluffing. Just facts. That's when the tone changed. Lauren called me that same day. And suddenly, the calm confidence was gone. Now it was explanations, miscommunication, old maintenance instructions, staff misunderstanding. She blamed the crew, the system, even hinted that guests had pressured them for better views. And I just listened, because at that point, it didn't matter anymore why they did it. What mattered was what I was about to do next. See, legal pressure is one thing. It's slow, methodical, expensive, and yeah, it works. But I realized something. I didn't actually have to wait for the legal system to hurt them. I could do that immediately. So the next morning, I hired a landscaping company. Not a basic crew, a full team with experience in privacy barriers and fast growth installations. And I showed them exactly where the surveyed property line ran. And I said, I want a wall, not a fence, not something subtle, a wall of trees. We planted a full line of fast-growing evergreens, dense, tall, positioned strategically so that even at their current height, they immediately started interrupting the view from those decks. And once they matured, that valley view those cabins were selling, gone, completely gone. And here's the thing, I didn't break a single rule doing it. It was my land, my trees, my boundary. Within days, the effect was obvious. Guests started noticing first, then complaining, then asking for refunds. Because that premium valley view they paid extra for, it was now a wall of green. No sunsets, no panoramic photos, no selling point, just my trees. And that's when the real panic kicked in. Lauren called again, then the property owner, then their lawyer. And this time, the conversation sounded very different. No more dismissive tone. No more, it's only trees. Now it was urgency. Their first offer came quick, $25,000 for permanent trimming rights. I declined. Then $50,000. Still no. And I could feel the pressure building on their side, because peak season was coming up, holidays, fully booked cabins, high-paying guests expecting that exact view they could no longer deliver. Every day that wall of trees stood there, it was costing them money. About a week later, they came back with the final offer, $140,000, in exchange for a 20-year view easement. legal permission to maintain a controlled viewing corridor through my trees, plus full compensation for every tree they had damaged or removed, including professional replacement planting. And I remember sitting there, looking at that number, and thinking about how this whole thing started. It's only trees. Yeah, I signed the agreement. Because at the end of the day, this was never about destroying them. It was about resetting the balance, making it very clear that my property wasn't an extension of their business plan. And once that balance was restored, the wall of trees, well, now it had a price. So yeah, that's how a few harmless tree cuts turned into a $140,000 lesson. And if you're sitting there thinking this was just a lucky win or some rare situation, it's really not. Stuff like this happens more often than people realize, just smaller, quieter, and usually unresolved. The lesson here is most property conflicts don't start with big violations. They start with tiny ones. A branch here, a few feet there, a temporary adjustment that slowly becomes permanent because no one pushes back early. And once that line gets blurred, it becomes very easy for the other side to convince themselves they're not doing anything wrong. And that's the first big takeaway. Boundaries are only real if you enforce them. Not aggressively, not emotionally, but consistently. Because the moment someone realizes there's no consequence for crossing your line, they stop seeing it as a line altogether. Now let's talk about the mindset for a second, because this part matters more than the legal side. What Lauren said, it's only trees, that wasn't just dismissive, it was strategic. Whether she realized it or not, she was reframing the situation, trying to shrink the importance of what was happening so I'd feel unreasonable for escalating it. This is a psychological trap. You see it everywhere. Neighbors, HOAs, even workplaces. Someone minimizes the impact of their actions, not because it's actually small, but because if you accept that framing, you're less likely to fight back. You start questioning yourself. Am I overreacting? Is this worth it? And once you hesitate, they gain ground. The second takeaway is recognizing that moment. The second someone tells you it's not a big deal, you should pause and ask yourself, not a big deal for who? Because usually, it's not a big deal for them, because they're the ones benefiting. Now, from a more practical angle, let's get into the legal side, because this is where people either protect themselves or lose quietly. From a legal perspective, documentation is everything. And I mean everything. If I didn't have that survey, those camera recordings, the arborist report, and especially that old signed agreement, this story ends very differently. Probably with a long, expensive dispute and a lot less leverage. According to standard procedure, the moment you suspect any kind of encroachment or property damage, you start collecting evidence. Photos, dates, communication records, all of it. Not because you want to go to court, but because you want the option to. There's a difference. And here's something a lot of people overlook. Leverage isn't just about being right. It's about being able to prove you're right in a way the other side can't ignore. That's what shifted everything in my case. Not emotion, not confrontation, proof. The third takeaway, timing matters more than people think. Notice I didn't immediately go nuclear the first time I saw a branch cut. I watched. I confirmed a pattern. I built a case. And then when I acted with everything lined up. That's the difference between reacting and responding. Because if you escalate too early without evidence, you look unreasonable. But if you wait too long without acting, you lose control of the situation. There's a balance there. And finding it is what separates a frustrating dispute from a decisive outcome. Now let's talk about something a little more strategic, options. Most people, when they get into conflicts like this, think in extremes. Either do nothing or go straight into a legal war. But there's a whole middle ground that's often more effective. What I did with the tree wall, that wasn't revenge for the sake of revenge. It was leverage applied in real time. It changed their situation immediately, without breaking any rules, and forced them to come to the table on very different terms. And that's the fourth takeaway. You don't always need to win in court to win the situation. Sometimes you just need to shift the pressure. Because once the pressure shifts, negotiations follow. And finally, let's talk about resolution. I could have pushed further. Could have taken them to court, forced removal of the decks, pursued maximum penalties. And maybe I would have gotten more money eventually. But it would have taken time, energy, and probably years of back and forth. Instead, I took the deal. Why? Because it solved the problem, compensated the damage, and established clear, enforceable boundaries moving forward. And that's the last takeaway. The goal isn't always to crush the other side. It's to fix the imbalance in a way that works for you long term. Sometimes that looks like a courtroom win. Sometimes it looks like a signed agreement and a check. So yeah, next time someone tells you it's only trees, just remember, it's never just about the trees. It's about respect, boundaries, and whether or not you're willing to defend them. Now I'm curious, what would you have done in this situation? Would you have gone straight to legal action or handled it differently?